Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today we are going to discuss Unit 4 from the text, Writing for Academic and Professional Success. So this unit would be delivered in 3 different video lectures. So this is part 1 of the entire series. So let's start with Unit 4. Now, Unit 4, as the title states, it is all about writing skills. So the first question that comes here is writing important? Or why is writing important? We all know that writing skills matter. Writing is important as long as you live in a society as a social being. Whether you are in a college or not, whether you study or not, whether you work or not, writing is an essential part of your life. As college students, you might have been asked a number of times by the teachers to write and submit a request letter. Sometimes, even in your daily life, when you go to some offices, sometimes when you go to a bank, sometimes you are asked to write a letter and submit. Suppose you're authorizing someone to buy something, maybe a courier or sometimes a letter from the post office or from some courier services, you will have to authorize someone else to buy it in your place. So again, to write an authorization, writing matters. So writing in today's life is very, very important. As we all know, there are different kinds of writing. So here is what we have to think now. The second question here is, have you ever felt a difference between a story and a newspaper article? Definitely yes. We come across different kinds of writing. When you read a newspaper, you find newspaper articles, editorials, you find a number of articles and write-ups with news value. At the same time, when you are reading a short story, it is totally different. The writing style is totally different. We have gone through Adrienne Rich and her speech. When you go through this text, we realize that this is again another kind of writing. You might have gone through autobiographies. That's again a different kind of writing. Poetry is again something else. Short story is different. A novel is different from an essay. So we have different kinds of writing and we can easily distinguish from one kind of writing with another. Now, why do different writers have different styles? Now, some writers would write in a comical style. Some writers would write in a very serious tone. If you remember E.V. Lucas and his work, Bose, that was a comical kind of essay which you have studied in the first semester. So different writers have got different styles. Some writers will write in a very emotional way. So writing has got different levels. And before we start with writing, we have to understand the term rhetoric. What do you mean by the term rhetoric? Rhetoric means methods adopted for effective communication. So those methods which you adopt to communicate effectively is what you call as rhetoric. More than this, knowing more about writing will help you prepare your assignments well, because as a student, you would be asked to submit assignments. Sometimes you would be asked to write a report and submit. Sometimes it would be letters. Sometimes it would be your project. So in all these cases, writing becomes an important element. So in this unit, Unit 4, we are going to discuss the different writing styles in academic writing. In total, there are 9 different styles. So I'm just naming them. It begins with narration, description, illustration, argumentation, comparing and contrasting, cause and effect, definition, process analysis, and the last one, classification or division. So these are the 9 styles of writing. Now, there are different ways in which you can write, but this unit will be discussing with some of the major kinds of writing styles. So, we'll begin with narration, and in the first part, we would be covering the first 3 writing styles: narration, description, and illustration. The next 3 will be covered in part 2, and the last 3 would be covered in part 3. So, now we are moving on to the first one, which is narration. Narration is a kind of writing that brings out a story. Now, narration is something which we all do. Even without our knowledge, we narrate stories. Imagine if you have watched a movie today and tomorrow when you meet your friend would automatically ask you, "How was the movie? Please tell me the story." And sometimes you would start telling the story. First this happened, then this, then that. So this continues. So when you start with a narration, we understand that there is some kind of an order, a logical order that we follow, which means the first part should be told first and the last part will come only at the end. So we maintain an order when you narrate something. So a narration relates with a sequence of events or thoughts. And narratives can be of 2 types. Narratives can be either fictional or it can be non-fictional. Now, fictional means something that is created or imaginary kind of thing, whereas non fictional means it is reality. And that is why we quite often call a novel as a fiction, because it deals with the imaginary world of the writer. So, fictional means imaginary things, non fictional is reality. Now, the best example to understand this difference would be Rudyard Kipling's Mowgli and a real life incident. So let's get back to Rudyard Kipling. Now, Rudyard Kipling's Mowgli, the cartoon and the later movie version, as all of you might know, is the best example for a fictional kind of narration because it deals with the story of a very small baby boy who is born and brought up within a jungle. The animals take care of this baby boy, and the animals, they are actually the foster parents of this boy. Now, if you look at the story, you can clearly see that this is fictional. Fictional in the sense, this was an imaginary idea created by Rudyard Kipling, and this is not a true story. But we enjoy this. So, this is what you call as a fictional narration. At the same time, on the right hand side, you can see the picture here of a leopard seated inside a car. Now, in many of the foreign countries, keeping wild animals as a pet is legalized. If you follow certain procedures, it is legalized and you can keep a wild animal as a pet, but it is not completely legal in India, I guess. So, if you look at the second picture, you can see this is not fictional, but this is reality. This is something which is happening. A couple of months back, there was an article in newspaper about a young man in Thailand who was living with a snake. Their friendship is so close that this man sleeps with the snake. So this is a real story which came in newspaper. There was a kind of a show which was showcased in a Discovery Channel based on this young man and his pet snake. So if you look at this, you can see this is non-fictional because this is reality. But at the same time, Rudyard Kipling's Mowgli is fictional. So hope you got the difference between fictional kind of narration and non-fictional kind of narration. So some of the best examples of fictional narratives would be short story, novella. Now, novella is actually a kind of work which is longer than short story but would be shorter than a novel. So it stands somewhere between a short story and a novel. So that is what you call as novella. Then folklore. Folklore is actually the oral kind of narratives which are passed from one generation to the other. So sometimes it would be like As you can see, a fairy tale kind of stories, imaginary kind of stories where demons, imps, angels can come. So that is what you call as fictional narratives. On the other hand, non-fictional narratives can include autobiography. The best example would be Gandhiji's My Experiments with Truth, because this is an autobiography in which realistic events and incidents are narrated. Then comes biography, news reports, recounting of incidents which actually happen, again with reporting things from the part of journalists. Now, whether it is fictional narrative or non-fictional narrative, they retain an order, a sequence, which means it would be organized and systematic. Moving on, telling a story and writing a story can be different. Now imagine you are telling the story of a movie you watched directly to your friend. When you are talking directly to your friend, there are lots of advantages that you can utilize. For example, the expression of your eyes, gestures, eye contact. So it is easy for the other person to understand the story. But at the same time, if you are going to write a letter to your friend somewhere else and you are narrating the story of something which happened, you have to be more clear and more precise because your eye contact is not witnessed, your expressions will not be seen by your friend, so you have to be more vivid, clear, and precise. So you have to maintain a correct order, a kind of pattern. Now, different stories have different styles, but all said and done, there are certain general characteristics that you can find with all storylines. So, those general features are plot, setting, characters, conflict, resolution, and point of view. So, these are the 6 elements that you can see in all stories. So, now let's discuss each of these one by one. So the first one is plot. So before we get into the definition of this plot, I would like to tell you the difference between plot and story. Now these are two terms which we use synonymously, but there is a difference. There is a difference between plot and story. Now the best example would be the movie Titanic. If you have seen the movie Titanic, can you remember how the story begins? The story begins with Rose as a very old lady, somewhere in her 80s or 90s, very old, with wrinkled face. And then she talks about her past. And then comes the earlier story as a flashback. And the ship comes in between, the love story comes in between. So this is how it goes, right? This is how the movie begins. Now, if you look at the story goes like this. A ship was built and it was believed that it is never going to sink. Jack gets into it, Rose gets into it, they fall in love with each other, there is a romance story happening, and finally the ship hits an iceberg. So this is how the sequence of events are happening. This sequence of events in the correct order as they happened, that is known as the story. But if you look at the movie Titanic, the director James Cameron has arranged these events in a different way. He has brought the last part of the real story to the first, which means you see Kate Winslet as an 80-year-old lady first, and then the plot moves backwards. So there is a kind of flashback happening, and finally, after telling the entire flashback, the story comes back to Kate Winslet again as an 80-year-old woman. So this kind of the arrangement done by the director to the real storyline is what you call as plot. So this is the difference between story and plot. Story means as they happened in reality, the correct kind of thing in order, but plot is the rearrangement done by the writer in the case of a novel or a director in the case of a movie. So plot means the events or the actions having a sequence, and this is actually done by the writer. The writer has the freedom to rearrange it. The next one is setting. Now, setting means the location where events happen. Sometimes it can be a place. Sometimes, for example, in Titanic, most of these events are happening within the ship. So, this is what you call as a setting. Then comes characters. Now, this includes the hero, the other supporting characters, villains, etc. Then comes conflict. Now, every story will have some kind of a conflict. And this is how the story moves, like a conflict arises, some kind of opposing situation would be there, and finally a resolution. The climax means this problem would be solved. This is how you see every storyline. If you look at any movie, you see the same kind of sequence. Everything goes well, but suddenly there is a problem. The best example would be the first part of Drishyam, Mohanlal's movie. So you can see, if you look at this movie, it's a happy family, but suddenly there is a problem coming in, and then the rest of the story goes in such a way as to resolve this problem. Then comes point of view. Now, point of view is actually the perspective of storytelling, from whose eyes the story is seen. Sometimes it would be through the eyes of a narrator, sometimes it would be told by the hero himself, so it comes in different ways. So, this is what you call as the general characteristics maintained by all kinds of stories. Now, when you narrate, there are certain things that you have to take care of. The very first thing is the impact you create, because when someone listens to your story, they should feel hooked with your story. And sometimes, if it is connected with your personal experience, people will be more curious about it. Now, again, you can see a picture here. This is known as inverted pyramid style. I repeat, this is known as inverted pyramid style, and this is a style of writing mostly used by journalists and reporters. Now, this style includes the way in which most important things are suggested first, then comes less important things, and finally least important things. So, this is a method they adopt in news reporting. So, sometimes even in narration, this can be followed. Again, generating curiosity is another important thing. There is a way in storytelling, because all people cannot tell stories, because storytelling is in fact a talent. And more than that, this story should help the readers visualize it in your mind. Now, that is the greatest impact. Now, when Harry Potter books were released, people really had a kind of location in their mind. They had an image about the main hero. So they had some kind of ideas related with the location, scene, characters, etc. Now, this is what you call as the impact created by the writer, because the writer makes you think of a place which you have not thought about until now. So, this is the quality that a writer should possess, specifically when we talk about narration. So, moving on, some of the best topics for narration would be like first day in your college, a traveling experience, memories of your ancestral home, sometimes about the city. So I have just named because Calicut is my city. So it could be about any place. So, all said and done, every narration will have some kind of personal aspects in that. So it's very difficult to narrate something without your personal aspect in that. Now, there are two examples given in your text. A piece written by George Orwell, and the other one is by Henry Gates. So please go through these examples so you will understand how this narration is done. So moving on to the second part. The second one is description. So we have completed narration. Now we are going to description. Now, description again is presenting information. And usually description comes with things, people, and situation. Sometimes you would be asked to describe things, or describe people, or sometimes describe situation. Now, description is always connected with senses. You know the five senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Because whenever you describe something, these are the qualities that you should highlight. Now, this never comes in narration. This appeal to the senses will come only with description. So let's look at these examples. The first picture, this is a flower, as you can see. Now, how do you describe a flower? You describe a flower using the concept of what you see. You describe it like the petals are white in color, the leaves are green in color. So, sight is given importance when you're describing a flower. The second one is sound. Now, how would you describe an orchestra? Or how would you describe a musical sound? So you describe it as it was a very feeble kind of sound, or sometimes you say it was very noisy. So others will able to understand how it had been. So that is the main idea behind description. You are passing information to someone else, making them understand the qualities of that thing. Let it be a human being or a situation or a thing. You are making another person understand its quality. The next one is smell. Now, sometimes when you cook something, you describe it using the smell. Sometimes you describe a perfume and its smell. So, that is a way through which you speak about the quality. The next one is using taste. How would you describe an ice cream? You will describe the taste, how it tasted. It was cold, or maybe it was so sweet, or sometimes you say it was so bitter. So, all these will come under the quality of taste. Then comes touch. Now, sometimes you say as soft as a baby, which means it's so soft. Sometimes you will be describing the fur of a cat, or sometimes you would be describing the surface of a teddy bear. So, all these are described using the quality of touch. Now, descriptive writings are mostly subjective. Now, it is called subjective because if I like ice cream, the way in which I describe ice cream would be definitely positive. But imagine if you are a person who is not very much interested in ice cream, you will not be describing it in the very same way as I had described. Suppose if I like pizza, the way in which I am describing pizza would be very positively. But if I ask someone else who hates pizza, the way that person would be describing pizza in a negative light. So description always would be subjective. But there are some other kinds of description which are very, very genuine, like without taking any sides, some descriptions come. For example, some news reports or some kind of testimonials, etc. It might not be very subjective in some cases, but mostly it would be subjective. For example, if someone is asking me to describe the village where I was born, that is a place where I was born. So definitely I would be having a lot of emotional attachment to that place. So naturally I would be only speaking good things about that place. But maybe if you talk to someone else who is very much new to that location, that person would not be speaking about the place in a positive light. So descriptive writings are mostly subjective. So some of the best examples would be a village, campus, teacher. Now I'm telling the example of a teacher because imagine any teacher that you like, okay? Or imagine any teacher that you dislike. Now, a teacher whom you like very much will not be liked in the very same way by your friend, okay? Sometimes your very close friend might dislike the very same teacher. So, the way in which you describe the teacher and the way in which your friend is going to describe the same teacher can be different. So, it's very, very subjective, and description mainly is done using the senses. Moving on to the third one, this is illustration. Now, illustration is explaining something with the help of examples. So, it's very simple. You're explaining something, but that comes with an additional assistance, which is by the use of examples. So to prove your point, you would be using photographs, and you call this as exemplification because you are proving your point with the help of a photograph or sometimes with the help of an example. Now, one best method to understand this would be, imagine if you are asked to illustrate on the topic waste disposal in your city. Imagine if the waste disposal is not done correctly in your city. What do? To prove your point, you would be taking pictures like this and you would be adding it to your assignment so that just by looking at the picture, we would understand, oh yes, what he or she is speaking about is accurately right. So your statement is actually proved with the use of an example. And it is not always photographs that you can use. Sometimes you can use graphs, charts, diagrams, etc. in order to prove your point. So this is the order that you follow in illustration. You will be giving a statement initially, and then you would follow the statement with an example. So this example will prove the point in your statement. So let's look at this. Ragging cases are reported in the college. The seniors entered the class and bet the juniors. So ragging cases are reported in the college means this is just a statement, a pure statement. But see the next line, the seniors entered the class and bet the juniors. So this is an example to prove your first point that ragging cases are happening in college. So this is how you do this illustration. You give a statement initially and then you prove it with an example. So some of the topics for illustration would be impact of social networking, advantages of living in a flat, adverse effects of drugs, etc. So in all these cases, you can prove it with statistics, chart, diagrams, or sometimes photographs. So with this, we come to the end of the first part of Unit 4. So thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have got any doubts or if you need more assistance, please feel free to connect with me in my email ID. So thank you very much. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.